Hello, my lovely library lions. Today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up video. I read 6 books in June, which obviously isn't my best, which I think is still January, but we're going to get right into it anyways. My first read in June was Stranger Than Fanfiction by Chris Colfer. So this was a pretty interesting read. It was about a kid actor who grows up on a set of a show that sounds kind of like it's a Doctor Who styled show, mixed a little bit with Harry Potter, in that you see the characters grow up, and it has a huge fan base. He's been acting in it since he was 12, and one day he decides he's going to go on a road trip with some of his fans after he gets a fan letter saying that they're going on a road trip. I couldn't not picture the celebrity in this book as Chris Colfer just because he's the author, and I think it was a really interesting sort of look into celebrity and how people treat celebrities and how they are actually just human beings and maybe want to be treated like human beings. At the same time, the book kind of shows us the opposite of that. I think it kind of lost itself when it depicts Cash as sort of a benevolent angel figure who comes into these characters' lives and fixes all their problems and teaches them how to live a fulfilling life and teaches them how to be bold and take chances and not apologize for who they are. So I think it was a little confused on that front. The message was there. They had the spirit of the message, and then they made Cash just a little above a regular human. He's not quite just a boy. He has the potential to fix everyone's lives, and he's going to. He's this guardian angel who's come down to them. I really liked the characters in this book. There was a lot of diversity. We have a gay main character. We have a trans main character. We have racial diversity as well in the main cast. And I think Chris Colfer did a good job exploring that with sensitivity to it. He did look into each of those characters and the troubles in their life and made them all well-rounded, fun people to read about. This cast was super fun. They had good chemistry. I really liked going on a road trip with them, which is a huge thing for me because I hate road trip books. I picked up this book just because it was about fandom, and I love books about fandom. And I thought, okay, maybe it's also a road trip book and that won't be so bad. But I actually loved the road trip aspect of this. I thought it was super, super fun. So that was surprising to me. The one thing that I didn't really enjoy about this book is it kind of seems like it looks down on fans a little bit. It just felt like there's a lot of vitriol towards fandom in this book. And because I came into this book wanting to read about fandom, that was a little disappointing to me. Otherwise, I really enjoyed it. It was a super fun read overall. I did read 2 Owl Crate books this month. The first one was A Sweet and Bitter Magic by Adrienne Tooley. So this was a sapphic enemies to lovers romance. It was about a girl who cannot feel love and a girl who can feel love for her father but is also a source of magic. And she makes a deal to give this girl all her love for her father if they go together to find this evil witch who is plaguing the world with a curse. I didn't really love this. I wanted to love it so much, but it's just kind of a mess of a book. I didn't feel any chemistry between the main characters at all. It was a disaster of a romance. They are not good together. They go through their adventure, and then at one point they're just like, you know what, I actually am in love with you. And they just say that in the text, and then it's like, yeah, I am in love with you too. It's just very robotic, very unnatural. I didn't feel like they were developing a solid relationship. The rules of the curse are also super vague, because it seems like it's not even really that big of a deal to figure out how to break it, and it doesn't feel like there's any rules about how to break it. I did like the twist of the villain. I thought that was interesting. I liked seeing the relationship between them and the villain. I thought that was the strongest part of the book. Honestly, I don't think this worked with 2 protagonists. I think Tamsin should have been the protagonist and Ren shouldn't have been, or Ren should have been the protagonist and Tamsin shouldn't have been. Splitting it between 2, we don't get enough development for either character. They both feel like they could have compelling stories, but they're cut short. The romance just didn't vibe with me. I didn't feel like it was a good romance, and I didn't enjoy reading it. There was no tension, there was no romantic sort of flair. It was just, they don't love each other, and then they do. And that's it. There's no slow build-up. It just happens. At one point in the story, they're like, okay, this is the point in the story where they're going to stop disliking each other. And it feels so sad because there is potential in this world. Tooley has invented this world that is quite interesting as far as magic and witches go, and I think explored maybe over a series or explored more deeply, it could have been very interesting, but there's too much focus on the characters moving from one place to another and it just sort of cuts the story short. The confrontation with the main villain comes out of nowhere. Essentially, the characters go for a short walk and they're like, well, here's the villain, and then they defeat her and it's done in about 30 pages after they've been walking for 40 pages just to get to the woods where they can figure out who the villain might be. It's not a good final confrontation. It feels like I wasted my time reading the first 75% of this book, and then they're just going to be like, okay, well, the villain is over there, and then they walk over and they beat her up and the book ends. It's just such a messy book in the end. I didn't really enjoy reading it. I wanted to love it so bad, you guys. Enemies to lovers is my favorite trope, and I thought it was going to be sapphic, it was going to be beautiful, I was going to enjoy it, but I didn't like the way that the characters fell in love. And it's not that they're bad characters either. I think they're both solid on their own. There was just no believable relationship development. And because the other plot is so poorly executed, this book was kind of resting on that relationship development. If it had been a good romance and the plot was so rushed otherwise, that would have been fine. It would have been a mainly romance book with like a little bit of adventure in there. But it feels like it is neither of those things. Both its plots completely flop, and I was so let down. The second Owl Crate book I read this month was Witches Steeped in Gold by Cian and Smart. So this is a pretty beefy book, and it definitely didn't need to be. This could have been a 300-page book. For the first 300 or so pages, our two protagonists don't even meet each other. This book is so long, and nothing really happens for most of it. The protagonists don't do anything. Things just kind of happen around them. Often things happen when you're not in that character's POV, and you'll come back and the character will be like, oh, well, there was this horrible thing that happened. Well, it wasn't in my POV. Glad that's dealt with. Let me think about my life for the next 20 pages while we're in my POV. And it's just 300 pages of them considering their lives, thinking about their relationships, until they finally meet, and then they still don't really do anything. Things just happen, and they happen to be there while the things happen. I didn't really care for this book. I wanted to love it. It has a very interesting world. I think the world was the best part of this book, that they built up this beautiful magic system with Jamaican influences. I thought that was super interesting, super original. But the story that it leads into is not interesting. Nothing happens. This is 500 pages and barely anything occurs. Almost nothing of note happens. I could not tell you where the climax was because I was equally bored all the way through. We have two main characters. We have Jasmine and Araya. Jasmine I actually really liked. I felt like she could have been a protagonist for a book. This is, again, a book with dual protagonists where I felt like it didn't really work that it had dual protagonists. Jasmine certainly has an interesting story. I would love to read a whole book from her perspective. I loved her perspective. Araya doesn't. She kind of just shifts to whatever the book needs her to be. Sometimes she's bold, sometimes she's uncertain, sometimes she's rude, sometimes she's pleasant to be around. She's a ruthless killer, but also she feels sad when she kills people. Sometimes, if that advances the plot. It doesn't make sense. I didn't feel like she had any certainty of character. There's a romance in her half of the story that feels robotic and cold, just like in Sweet and Bitter Magic. I didn't care for the two characters together at all. I thought it was really weird that they tried to develop that romance when they couldn't even develop a plot that was happening. And I just felt like overall Jasmine had the more interesting story. Her relationship with her mother was super compelling. And I feel like we missed out on seeing a lot of that because we were focusing on Araya. I mean, with 500 pages, we should have been able to focus on both of them, but like I said, not a lot happens. There's just a lot of descriptions of things, and I feel like the story is honestly so trapped inside these two characters' heads that we don't see enough of the outside world. We don't see enough of what other characters are doing. It's just these two characters thinking about things that have happened to them or that they feel, and I don't feel like there's any plot. It also doesn't feel like a very character-driven story because Araya doesn't change. She doesn't develop at all. She starts the book one way and she ends the other way. Jasmine does have a character shift, which is nice, but because it's only half the book, it doesn't feel as rewarding as it would have felt if it was the whole book. I'm not going to pick up the sequel for this one. It was honestly a chore to get through. I was reading it and I would want to do anything other than pick it up again and read it again because I would rather have been doing anything than continuing this book. I deeply wanted to do something else other than read this and get through the 500 pages of story that it contained. Just super let down. And it's a shame because I think Smart has a really good writing style. It just needed to be trimmed. There was so much fat in this story that didn't need to exist. There's no reason for it to be this long. This could have been 300 pages easily and led into an exciting sequel. Instead, we have 500 pages that, ends on a cliffhanger, but I'm so bored by that point I don't even care to pick up the sequel at all. Next, I read This Is Our Story by Ashley Elston. So I had actually forgotten why I put this book on my TBR. It is a crime sort of legal thriller, and I loved this book. It was so good. I honestly didn't expect much when I went into this, and I ended up falling in love. I love the way that Elston has written her 4 main sort of suspects. They're sort of these rich boys who don't ever get in trouble for anything, and now it's suspected that one of them has murdered their friend, or perhaps there was a hunting accident where they're all going to be, in trouble for involuntary manslaughter. I thought each of these characters was super compelling. I liked their stories. I liked that they each had individuality, and Elston takes the time to develop them each as a character. I do think she could have developed the boy who is actually culpable a little better, because halfway through the book I'm like, oh, we've gotten a lot of scenes with these other 3 boys making them sympathetic. I wonder why we haven't seen the 4th boy being sympathetic very much. And I think it would have been a stronger story if she would have made the murderer or the shooter more sympathetic, because it would have been harder to tell who it was. And I think there were good hints that weren't the fact that she wasn't focusing on him. She didn't need to not focus on him for us to guess who it was. So that would have maybe made it a little stronger, but otherwise I loved it. I loved Kate. She was such a fun main character. I liked that she worked in a courthouse. That was a really unique sort of perspective for a story like this. And I even really loved the relationship between her and the boy that develops over text messages, and I thought that was really cute. It was a really well-written relationship. I didn't feel like it took away from the story or it took time out of the mystery. I felt like it added stakes to the story. And I just really liked figuring out more about these boys. Honestly, I would read more books about them and Kate. I think they're really compelling characters. I very rarely feel this strongly about characters from a contemporary novel, so I was really shocked that I enjoyed it so much. And Elston's writing is honestly just so quick to read. There are so many good twists. I was able to figure out the perpetrator through all the foreshadowing that she did, which I think is important in a mystery story, that I'm able to figure out the mystery. I don't want to be shocked because the twist came out of nowhere and there was no adequate foreshadowing. So I really appreciated this. I'm definitely going to read more of Elston's works because, honestly, she's a really good author. And I didn't expect to go into this book finding a new author that I was going to love and want to read more of their work. I just thought this was something that I'd forgotten why I'd put it on my TBR sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and I wasn't going to enjoy it. But I love this. This is a good book. I would recommend this to anyone looking for a legal thriller, especially if you're looking for YA. If you like The Raven Boys, this kind of has a little bit of that feeling in it, but like obviously a little more sinister. The manga I read this month was Fullmetal Alchemist, the Fullmetal Edition, Volume 13. So this does have the scene that I was really looking forward to in it, where Ed gets injured, and I think it's a really powerful scene because he has to look at the world in a way that he has never looked at it before, where he acknowledges that not killing people and choosing peace is often going to be more difficult, and it can often, lead to you getting hurt. You can't always reason with a villain. You can't always be nice to the villain because some villains are going to kill you. They're not going to pull punches because you're a kid. And I think that's a very powerful scene, and I like seeing how he deals with that. And I also think it develops his relationship with Winry and just the other characters really well in this volume. We see him learn that he can't protect everyone, that he needs to put faith in other people, even people he wouldn't typically trust. And I think that's a really, really strong scene. I liked Kimberly a lot better in this volume. I didn't like him in volume 11 when he first started becoming one of the main villains, but I think he gets a good amount of focus on this volume, and I really feel like he comes into his own even though he's not going to be around much longer. So that was interesting. I do feel like we're losing something in the Fullmetal editions, though. I feel like the places where the volumes break up aren't very good anymore. I don't know if they were maybe better when they were in the original volumes, because we have cut down from 22 volumes to 18 volumes when we moved to the Fullmetal editions, so now the breaks are at different points. And it doesn't feel like this volume is following a story thread. It just feels like these are the chapters that have to go into this volume to make it the right size. And it feels like we lose a little bit of the... So we don't get a satisfying conclusion. This This volume contains several different stories. It feels like it's all over the place. We have the Briggs stuff, we have some stuff with Roy and Riza, we have some backstory for Hohenheim, and then it just abruptly ends. And it's not ending on a point where it feels natural for it to end, so I wonder if when they switched to the Fullmetal edition, we lost those natural cutting points from the old volumes. Otherwise, I really love this. Of course, I love all of Fullmetal Alchemist, so that's not a surprise, but I am really excited to get the next volume, especially because it has Greedling on the cover, and I really love him. The last book I read this month was Thunderhead by Neil Shusterman. This is the sequel to Scythe, and I can't believe it took me so long to read this book. I loved every second of it. I loved the twist that I didn't quite see coming. I loved the development that we see Citra and Rowan have. I initially didn't really care for Rowan and Citra as dual protagonists of Scythe, but here I really like the two different sides of things that we're getting to see. I also really like Grayson, who's a new character that we get to see in this book, and he is sort of a more normal person. He isn't a Scythe, he just grows up with the Thunderhead and really sees it as a parental figure, and I thought that was a very unique lens to have in this book. And actually, Shusterman does do a lot of different POVs in this series, and we get to see the POVs of a lot of different characters, other Scythes, other normal workers, and it really helps to develop the world and the dystopia that these people are living in. I think that's one of Shusterman's strongest points, is that when he writes a dystopia, it's very believable. He has everything thought out. The points of the book that are from the Thunderhead's point of view are so good. I love seeing how the Thunderhead thinks of itself. It reminds me a bit of Aiden from Illumini, in how it sees itself as helping humanity, as being there for humanity. It's not an evil AI, it's benefiting humanity. It's benevolent, it wants to help. And you know what? I almost felt a little sympathetic for it when I was reading its parts. Like, maybe I wouldn't mind a giant AI controlling the world if it was as kind and reassuring as the Thunderhead is. I really also enjoyed seeing the charter regions. I like that Texas is one of the charter regions and it has essentially no rules. It was just a really interesting dive into the world. The characters almost take a back seat to the development of the world and the Thunderhead and how everything runs here. And I really, really, really loved that. It's such an interesting read. I can't wait to read The Toll, but I'm also really scared because a lot of people say that The Toll is the worst book in the series and that it brings the quality of the series down. And I really don't want it to, because I love Scythe and I loved Thunderhead. I want to finish strong. I want to love The Toll and just adore this series all the way through. So that is it for the month of June. I read 6 books again. Not my best, but it's actually pretty good. It's more than 1 book a week, which is what I sort of try to aim for. 6 books is my goal every month, so I'm really proud of myself. I hope that you guys are meeting all your own reading goals, and I'm glad that you watched this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next Friday.